Hello everyone, and welcome to the first in a brand new series where I am going to be going around the LEGO train community and I'm going to be interviewing as many LEGO train builders as possible. This is going to be done in a podcast format. I'm still figuring out how things are going to be done, so future episodes might be done in a very different way to this one. But this is a brand new project, this is very exciting, and I had a couple of people eager to join for this podcast adventure. And the very first person I'm interviewing from the LEGO Train fandom is the user TheLegoRailwaySeries. Hello, good sir, how are you?
Hey, how you doing, Luke?
I am doing wonderful. I'm a little bit nervous as well because I've done as much preparation as I can, and we are now in the actual recording process. So this is going to be hopefully smooth, but at the same time, something is bound to go wrong because, of course, it will. So the process is going to be in the style of an interview. Again, I want to try and format this as a podcast so you can put this on in the background and listen to this as a way of being able to be a bit more familiar with myself and the people I try and get on for this show. The idea of the show as well is to kind of introduce everyone to everyone. There's been a couple of people who have said to me, it'd be really cool to get some big names, but I don't think I would fit because of that. And I immediately said to them, this isn't supposed to be, big names, so to say. There are some people I would love to be able to sit down and have a chat with, but that's not really the goal of this. So there's going to be so many people I want to have a chat with, anyways. And yeah, so being able to carry on with this project in the first place is really exciting. And once again, this is done in an interview style as well. So I've got a series of questions lined up for my guest today. And these questions are subject to change for future episodes as well. So these questions might be slightly altered in future episodes. Some of these questions might be removed altogether. Some new questions might be added in future episodes, but that is, again, down for the future to decide. So, finally, if we actually get on with the interview process, so please tell the world what your name is and whether you are a TFOL or AFOL.
Hey, all right. So, my name's Michael, whichever. I'm online for my Lego train stuff anyway. I go by the Lego Railway Series. I'm an A-fold, definitely.
Okay.
See, I seem to be every time it comes up, I seem to be one of all the older people too.
So the next question, what type of train theme or region do you mainly build?
So, I'm mostly UK locomotives, specifically British stock. Um, Obviously by my name, online anyway, the Railway Series, I mostly model, Thomas the Tank Engine characters, Railway Series characters. So obviously I have a bias. Basically, is that if it ever showed up in the books or in the TV series, regardless of what version of it, I have an immediate draw to those types of classes of locomotives and stuff in general, whether they're come from different regions or not. Obviously, Thomas is mostly UK, British trains. So that's where my primary interest seems to be.
There's been a very interesting fascination where there's it's not exactly unique because what I'm about to say is applicable to a lot of other people with different regions. But since I build British, it's fascinating to see people outside of the UK prefer to build British. Um, an excellent example is British Bricks, who is Australian, but he dominantly builds British prototype models. Um, Again, the Lego Train Club I'm in, the LUKR, has a couple of international members, and it's always so interesting where they do their own Instagram Q&As, and they say, you're going to build this one day, because, when you're on the internet, eventually you're going to get someone ask you, could you build this one day? You're really good at trains. Could you make this model for me?
I've
And
already gotten a few of those, and I've just been ignoring them.
yeah, after a while, you just get used to it, and it's just boring at that point.
uh, I'm actually the same way. I live on the east coast of the United States. I'm the same way. When my almost entirely my focus is overseas locomotive rather than American locomotives, which I actually find to be a bit ugly, to be honest.
There are some American engines that I think look really cool. I've been definitely taking a liking to some of the Pennsylvanian engines. The T1 and the S1 in particular are
Yeah, those are
just,
both real nice. Those are both streamlined, right?
yeah, they're both giant streamlined engines. That is right up my alley. I love that.
Yeah, the American American engines that were like streamlined during the Art Deco era, like a
Mm.
lot of those are pretty engines, but I'm not really keen on building them.
Yeah, there's a lot of people who I can't remember who said this. I think I was watching a live stream with, I think it was British Bricks and Glenn Holland's series of streams, where eventually Glenn said that American engines have the function over form, and that's
But yeah,
why they
definitely.
look the way they do, which makes sense. Not to say the British engines don't have their function, but they definitely put some of the effort into styling them out as well. Shout out to Mike's Bricks, who I think it was him who even said during one of his Instagram Q&As, where he got the messages from people saying, "You're gonna build this. Why don't you build American?" And he just straight up said, "No, American's ugly. I'd rather build British." So that sort of thing fascinates me. It was like, you don't want to build your home region, you want to go abroad, which is again, and that's the thing where I mentioned earlier, where it's not exactly unique. Where I've had the temptation to want to build some American engines, and me being British, that's a whole new territory for me. So it's a bit intimidating, but at the same time, that's like, oh, I really want to, you know.
Yeah, I get it. And I mean, obviously, working in the Lego medium in general. Um, so personally, I find the British locomotives to actually be simpler to build. With the American locomotives, it's not that I wouldn't want to ever build them, but like I said, I have my kind of hyper preference towards this stuff because I grew up with Thomas the Tank Engines, so I remember the colors and the characters and stuff. That's where nostalgia bites me when it comes to build certain things. I mean, obviously everyone has their favorites. I mean, a Union Pacific Big Boy, for example. That's one that I like. Obviously, largest engine. I think it's the largest or most
I
powerful or
think
both. I don't
I
remember.
think officially it's the largest steam locomotive ever. But at the
It's not
same
the most
time, with the
powerful.
big boy, I think everyone at some point has tried a big boy. I made one about three,
Oh
four
yeah,
years
yeah, yeah.
ago.
In general, like American stock or locomotives are just big black, smooth, heavy stuff, really long distances. They kind of blend together for me. When it comes to visuals and stuff.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the key points. That definitely makes sense as well, because I remember having this conversation with a couple of people online too, where I don't remember how it started, but I remember saying to a couple of people, why won't we ever see Big Boy do a UK tour? I was like, well, British rails aren't made to accommodate that kind of engine.
My
The
God,
UK
Big Boy
is,
would crush the rails.
yeah, the UK would basically, like, if the UK was a part of America, the UK is basically just one state. It's not necessary to have anything that large on British rails, which is why I think we kind
Absolutely.
of have weaker and smaller locomotives. Which is
To
why
mention
it
that
probably
the
goes in hand as to why we've decorated them so much. You said just
right.
now as
Well,
well, where you said, "Oh, I reckon a British locomotive would be easier to build." But having seen some of the American engines, again, like you mentioned a moment ago, where they're all black, they all kind of blend in when they're all next to each other. All the vibrant colours and the wacky shapes that some of these British engines got, it's actually one hell of a challenge.
see, for me, I don't think it's the shape. The shapes themselves aren't the difficult part for me. It's the outer detailing, all the greebling around around the models. Is the American engines? They have so much more going on the boilers than a lot of British stock does.
Mm.
There's just more that you have to get right, and there's more, just more. Same color too, so even when you do it, it's like, well, it's still all black.
Yeah, I remember just there's been times where, it's like midnight, I've still got an hour before I want to go to bed. And I'll just look up Lego train videos. And some of the American steam locos that people have built, the boilers are just so busy. There's no one place you can look at that's a bit calm, if that makes sense. Again, like you said, there's so
Yeah.
much greebling, there's just so much busyness going on. Okay, then, so tell us about your current Lego train collection.
Well, currently, it's 99% digital. I've only recently just been able to build one of my models, which is Percy. I wish I based off the G. It's the GWR 1338 at the Dicot Railway.
Yeah, yeah.
And I saw that someone never ending story of what is Percy based on.
Hmm.
Happened to see that logo on Twitter, And I was like, well, there he is. I just have to add a bunker and I'm done. There's still a lot more work to do to him, but as of right now, he is my only physical, the only thing I've made physically.
I remember you posting a video of your work in progress for Gordon, which first of all,
So,
your model of Gordon won the public favorites for both, like for my competition. You won the public favorite. Did you win public favorite for the Brick Train Awards as well?
yes, I did.
So I think that's a bit of a clue. You need to get on and make that in brick form because that's going to be one hell of
Well, I
a
know,
thing to see.
oh yeah. I mean, Percy was the first one I've got like properly finished. I mean, like I said, there's still work to do, but he's 99% the way there. Gordon, on the other hand, I only started building him physically because I was having a clearance issue digitally and I had to test it. So I built the boiler half, which still wasn't even actually complete, just enough for me to figure out the clearance issues. And right now he's taken apart. He's been put away while I'm counting parts to figure out what I need left to finish him. Gordon is 3% done and Percy's 90% done. Whereas Percy's put together, Gordon is parts.
That's going to be really interesting to see the finalized version of your Percy because when people build digitally, it's very interesting to see what kind of what they can really squeeze together. I'm not someone who builds digitally. I don't really have that kind of patience personally. But it's very interesting to see a person who's, people that spend months, testing stuff digitally, and when it comes to making things physically, it's like a transformation in some cases because you can make a beautiful render of a digital model, go through all the stages to fix anything that you couldn't test in the digital world, and then when they have that finalized model, it is really quite the something to actually look at and go, yeah, that looks amazing. So in the
Oh
case
yeah,
with your Percy and your Gordon, definitely, because that's obviously a model you started. I'm very well. It's just your build style in general because of how much detail and greebling you've added. I'm very keen to see your fleet brick built.
I mean I am too. I've been doing this for a while. I think a year properly now. It was always on and off beforehand, but once I found Studio, I was really able to jump into it. Um, Having Percy in hand, definitely one thing I have to change. Seeing it properly, like in person, I'm like, oh, I don't quite like that. Is he needs a wider boiler. Aside from that, haven't needed to really, and that's only an aesthetic change. There's been nothing wrong with my design from digital to physical. I've not had to change a single thing, which is thanking God on that one because Percy was a nightmare.
I feel like that's a bit of a rare achievement because I remember seeing conversations as well online where you just go online. I think on the Lego Rail Facebook group in particular, where every now and then on a digital model, people say, "Have you been able to test this? Could you do it this way?" Same old sort of questions. And it's definitely come down to that. Every now and then you will see someone say, "Well, you can't say it's the final design because you haven't tested it in brick form." One of our club members, Will, who runs Block Junction, he gave an amazing talk to the club members about how to build a locomotive chassis, and there were at least one, maybe twice during that talk where he said you could have the best digital model ever built, but it could be absolutely rubbish when it comes to physically building it because you simply cannot make those judgments, for lack of a better word, when it comes to building digitally. I think that's also part in why I don't bother with digital models personally. Again, it's because I'm just not patient, but at the same time, if I want to test something out, I'm going to race to my boxes and make a mess on the floor and actually give it a proper go. But I think with the way that you've built your models, there's, again, from the aesthetic alone, it definitely shows that you've put so much effort into making sure that everything works. So like you
Oh
said, when it
yeah, I
came
mean,
to making your Gordon model, you had to go to a point where you made a section of the model just to triple check that that clearance thing worked.
and I only did that because I was being paranoid. With Gordon, once I'd actually put it together, I actually went, oh, but that does work. So I didn't even have to change anything, and I did Gordon. I just couldn't tell digitally. I mean, I was close. I'm like, does that become an issue physically? And that was actually how I learned that digitally, at least in studio, the Legos are the bricks in the program are much more mathematically perfect than they are in real life. So I've learned that I can actually get away with a lot more than I thought I could digital. Physically, there's no issues. So far, when it comes to translating my designs from digital to physical, I've actually not had the same problems that a lot of people have when trying to do the same thing. Because I'm very, very particular about making sure that everything is connected to something and that I know that it's stable.
That's something I praise a lot as well, because the rare moments I've been able to see another person's models, like their physical models, like at meets and at Lego shows, for example, because I build my models to have slightly less detail, but in turn they're more structurally sound, I know I can pick up one of my models with like 2 fingers and it's not coming apart at all. There's no loose or weak points. Chris, who runs Glasgow Brick Subway, has a fleet of '08 shunter diesels, but the design features a mechanism where you can just slide the body off to reveal the power functions. Every single time I forget that, so when I go to grab it and pick it up, I pick up by, I don't know, a couple of inches off the floor, then the top bit slides off, and that's getting crushed in my hand because I'm kind of squeezing my fingers a bit to make sure I'm not losing the grip. But then it all falls to the floor and it shatters, and that's something that really frustrates me.
When I was building Percy, I actually thought I was going to have that problem because as I was doing it, I realized, oh, I made a slight error in assuming how tight tolerances would be physically. The connections are there, it's just that the tolerances weren't. As I was building them, I went, oh no, his boiler's not connected. But then as I finished it, cab, the way I had connected everything, ended up holding the boiler on, no issue. I'm like, oh, okay, this was a problem that fixed itself as I finished the model. It's really weird. Like, I could redesign Percy's boiler a bit to have a proper connection. It turns out that now it makes it easier for me to get to the electronics inside. I don't know, it was a bit strange because I'm like, oh no, a problem. Well, the problem fixed itself and now has now become like a feature because it makes it easier to get to the electronics.
So, off the top of your head, do you know how many models you have in your collection, digital and physical?
Ooh.
Because you've posted a fair amount of your models to Flickr.
Well, what's on Flickr, on my Flickr account, is not even close to what I've actually got digitally. I mean, obviously Thomas characters, so I'm just going to rattle off their names rather than like, oh, this is this class of engine or this is this class
Yeah,
of
yeah,
engine.
yeah.
Although if you're curious, go ahead and ask me what they are, because I mean, at least in the case of one of them, Henry, who is about close. He's close to being finished. I'm hoping that by the end of the month, I'll be able to post him. I've changed him from a Black 5 to a Jubilee. It works better for me because of I was having issues with the front end, and the larger drive wheels look nicer with my build style. So Henry's a Jubilee instead of a Black 5. But as for what I've got Gordon. These are the finished ones. Gordon, Thomas, Percy, James, Bill and Ben, Penny Clarabelle, Express Coach, a generic open plank wagon. I think that's all that I have. That's like 100%. I've called the models done. They're just waiting to be transferred to physical. A work in progresses, on the other hand, I've got rest of the Henry, Toby, Mavis, Lady, Diesel 10, Spencer, Arthur, Donald Douglas, Edward. I mean, I actually lose track of what ones I have because of how many I've just. I'll get stuck on a certain model. Rather than force my way through the problem, I'll just start a new one. Oh, I've got more than I can even remember off the top of my head. The ones that I've listed are the ones that have significant amounts of work finished to them. Actually, like, oh, it's a model, not just random collection of parts on the computer screen.
There's 3 models that stand out for me. First of all, your Express Coach is insane because I've seen variants and work in progress pictures for it, and it's just an insane coach.
Yeah, what is it? It's the
Has-
class Mansell, however you pronounce that. I have
Yeah, yeah.
no idea.
Or
Yeah, that
Mansell.
one is. I don't know if you've seen the finished pictures of it. It's actually like
Maybe
fun.
if I dig on the Discord server, I might see it. That's the one. It's just
Well,
so much around the wheels and the brake rigging, the window frames as well, even everything that's going on with the roof. It's just there's just so much that make it finished, you know.
and it's got the full interior, um, apartments, hallway, minifigures can fit no problem. And I've actually designed the bogies in such a way that no one will be able to tell if it's motorized or not. I know on a lot of, I've seen it on a lot of different models where engines aren't strong enough to pull these Lego trains. It's just no way. And they put the motors in the bogies and the rest of the train. A lot of times you can just tell which ones are which. My express coach, I've purposefully gone out of my way to build the motorized bogie first, and then basically made an unpowered version of it.
So with this being motorized, how would you? Well, with the images you sent me, there's obviously a full decorated interior. How would you accommodate a battery? Is this power up or power functions, or even 9 volts?
It would be. It's the bogie itself is not self-powered. It has a gearbox that runs on a shaft into the body of the coach, which is where the motor itself would be in the coach, using a drivetrain.
Right.
So
Okay.
gears to axles to gears.
That's gonna be a very if it's possible to try and get a bit of a closer look at the internals to see how that would actually work, because I rarely touch
Well,
Technic and power
this
stuff,
is
so this already is a bit too
the
much.
first class coach here. Probably the only one that won't be motored because I really can't fit anything of that inside and still have the interior. It
Yeah.
would be it's the only one that won't be motorized. The ones that probably will be would be like dining coach. I could hide some of that stuff in the kitchen, or a baggage coach where there's really nothing inside that anyway other than just a room for luggage. I could section off half of it to be designated, the motor and battery room. Those coaches I've not finished yet, but I've got a plan.
Lovely. Yeah. It's So, is that going to be power up or power functions? Because if it's power functions, you might have to figure out how you're going to hide or at least sort of camouflage the infrared receiver. Because the way I've done it on my other coaches, it's just this 2x2 stud gap where the infrared receiver is just poking out of the roof. It's a very standout and somewhat ugly thing, but I don't know how else I could really disguise it. And the one thing
Yeah,
with these coaches as well, these coaches don't have corridors. So an old design I tried was to have the receiver basically be the corridor, but that turned out to be an even bigger mess. So I'm not too sure how to really, or at least I didn't know how else to really hide it.
yeah. I haven't really decided on what system I'm using. I've kind of decide that model to model. Like Thomas model, I am very particular about making sure that even if the engines can't pull a long train, engines themselves can at least move under their own power. So all of my engine models are motorized, or they are intended to be. But for example, a Thomas model is power functions. I used power functions because it required less room. It's got the medium motor, IR receiver, and then for the battery, I'm using a modified wire to just straight attach a 9-volt battery. Whereas for Gordon, it's using the new powered up, because the medium motors have rooms for studs on the side, like there's little cutouts.
All
The original
right.
motor doesn't quite work properly in system. They redesigned it a little bit for powered up, and it works much better. Gordon has two powered up motors in the boiler and the battery pack in the tender.
That's really cool. Are you going to so you definitely be interested in using different power systems then?
Yes, really, as long as I can get them working, I don't really care if they're all different. They're called circuit cubes.
Yeah, the circuit cubes.
Smaller motor, much smaller Bluetooth battery, and it all
Mm.
fits.
Yeah, they're definitely popular in the LUKR. There's a lot. Well, Trace in particular, one of the international members, has made countless tank engines, and I'm pretty certain every single one of them is powered. and in turn, every single one of them has its own circuit cube, which is a bit insane to think about because he has to buy so many circuit cubes, but they're so handy for that size of model.
So yeah.
I was going to say another thing I think rediscovered because I've seen this online with other people. Liam Biggs as well has kind of revealed this as well, where he has like he'll have a power function setup model, but the battery he uses will be a proper strong lipo battery. Do you think you could probably pull that off one day, or is that a bit? That's too intimidating for me because that definitely because the
I've
lipo battery
actually
is so strong.
actually may have I actually believe I've seen pictures on that. I don't know if I would really ever feel like I needed to be bothered with that, depending on how long I want to run something. Not that I even have a display, even run anything at the moment. Barely even have room for track. No, I guess it would just depend on if I find my needs being in the future. I'll make a decision then on whether I'm doing stuff like that. Obviously, I'm not all that adverse to it, considering I've got Thomas hooked up to a 9 volt. Not much different.
So, given your current collection, I don't think this next question really applies to you. But have there ever been any models that you have scrapped that you look back and you think, oh man, I wish I didn't scrap that? So, given that you build a lot of digital models, did you delete files and go, oh, I wish I didn't delete that?
Not, not really. It's more along the lines of uploaded versions, if you could say. Edward, bane of my existence, have a lot of different versions of him that I've deleted because it just wasn't working the way I wanted it to. I'm not scrapping Edward, the character, or the model itself. There's been a lot of very drastic changes that you could consider it different model entirely. Where he started to where he is now. I guess that's the best way I can put it is that there's been a couple things I've just started over from scratch.
Yeah, working on a different iteration of the model.
Exactly. I actually have a file called the Scrapyard.
That's
Because
cool.
what I'll do is I'll copy and paste something if I know it's not working, but could be useful later. I just copy paste the whole model, throw it in there, and be done with it. If I ever need, like, oh, I had an idea for something, but it was old, and I'll check to see if I had saved it in the Scrapyard, and sometimes it comes back out, and a part of something might be used for something else. I have the luxury of doing that because basically all of what I do is digital. So I guess you can't really say I've scrapped anything.
Yeah, that definitely makes sense. So, even though you build a lot of Thomas characters, which is predominantly Steam, do you have any preference when it comes to locomotives? Do you prefer steam, diesel, or electric?
It's I definitely have a preference towards Steam. Just more interesting to watch move, to be honest. I mean, with diesels and lots of types, most diesels, because I mean, like, example of '08, the class '08s, the Gronks, they still have the side rods.
Yeah,
Um, I just like watching. They're more visually interesting when they're actually moving to me.
that's definitely come up as well. Where obviously the joke "box on wheels" it comes up to a lot of people who build diesels and electrics, but it definitely makes sense where a diesel is just so much less interesting to watch. I earlier today, in fact, spent the morning and afternoon working on my streamlined coronation because I don't know what inspired me to do this, but I thought, you know what, I really should finish off the whole rod setup because I've got the main rod connecting all the wheels together, and I've got the other rod that goes into the cylinder. One of them is called connecting rod, the other one's called coupling rod. For the life of me, I can't remember which one is which. But there's a few more other ones, other rods that would go in that setup, so to say. So I've been able to figure that out today through some modification, and the fact
Yeah,
that
I'm still learning.
there's more moving parts, and that's just so cool to look at.
Yeah, I'm still learning a lot of the names for specific parts too. I'm quite happy with the rods that I've gotten for what I've come up for mine. I think you've seen Gordon's rods before.
Yes, you. I remember seeing as well on one of the Discord servers where you did like an instruction, so to say, where you kind of revealed or unrevealed one brick at a time, as if you were kind of building the whole rod setup. where
I
you've
was
got a
just
rod
kind of,
piece
I just
going in
wanted
here,
to
you've got the hook going onto this piece, and that's basically the rod. It all connects this way. And I remember looking at that thinking, that's kind of simple in a way because that's all it really is. But oh my god, it's brilliant! There's no
no.
chunky Technic bricks or I loved it. Absolutely loved it.
And one of the things when I was building Gordon, because he was my first large locomotive. Actually, here's a picture of his rods. Is I can't stand the rods on Lego steam locomotives are always like big chunky affairs, are entirely 3D printed. I don't like either of those because the 3D printed ones to me always look out of place. They don't look like Lego in some cases. Just look like Lego compatible model railway. Then you've got the big chunky Technic versions that are just like it clearly did something there. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'm in the camp of big chunky Technic ones, mainly because it's cheaper and easier. But yeah,
But no,
looking at
I
your rod setup here, it definitely works because when you look at a real life locomotive, the rods are thin. If you were to put it in a scale at the Lego train scale, the thin rods that people make is technically way too thick. It should be thinner. And that definitely
yeah.
helps when it comes to the overall setup and having it all kind of fit together.
But what I did was, wanted something that still looked like Lego.
Yeah.
Now, I actually had a lot of people come to me and go, "There's no way that would work physically. It looks too fragile. It looks too." I've tested it. I've actually tested this physically, and it works great. But the only downside to mine is the actual coupling pieces, like where the wheel attaches to the rod. You can tell in the image, say modified lift arm. Now there is a legal piece I could use as an alternative. It's way too expensive for me to use physically. So I digitally created what I would be doing physically, modifying these lift arm pieces to hold these tubes, rigid tubes. I forget what they're called.
Yeah, it may as well just be like tubes, that sort of thing, yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, on my Gordon's rods, I mean, what you see is what you get. It works as it should, as you would expect it to. It's smooth as butter.
I remember, I think this was for the TLR Awards back in the summer. And because with every model that got submitted for the competition had its own social media post. And there were definitely a lot of models that stood out above others. And I would kind of go to the club and say, "Oh, have you seen this model that got entered?" And when you entered your Gordon model, it was definitely one of them. I don't remember if it might have even been a couple of people, but yeah, there was definitely a couple of people who said, "Oh, the greebling looks nice, but it also could be so fragile. Like, how would you get all these pieces kind of stick together?" So it's definitely a case of the detail wouldn't be there if it didn't work.
But yeah, that's definitely how I build. I mean, like I said, I'm very particular about making sure things are connected and work. Wouldn't be calling Gordon finished if the final model, once he's built physically, didn't look exactly like what the images I've shown you are. Because that's the plan, and as of right now, I've got no reasons as to why he wouldn't look like that. It's just a matter of getting the pieces together and doing it.
Yeah, that's the expensive part now. You got the fun organizing bit done. Now it's time to actually buy the bricks, which is yeah, it's a bank account drainer that.
Well, I know, especially through Bricklink.
Mm.
Got a good. He shouldn't be too bad to finish him off, though. I've already got the third-party wheels, most of the boiler half. It's really just a matter of filling in a couple gaps that I forgot to buy the first time, or things that I've slightly changed since I bought them to begin with, and the tender.
Having mentioned the wheels, the main drive wheels, are they 2XL or 3XL?
I believe they are 2XL. Yes, they're 2XL.
Having seen again going back to the members weekend with the Lego Train Club, having seen a few models with 3XL wheels, and of course now that I've got the I bought the UCS Hogwarts Express set, and that basically it's still uncertain as to what that size wheel technically is. It's 50 millimeters in diameter. That much is known because that's what it's described as on Bricklink. But just seeing that massive size wheel, it would be fun to make something with it. But at the same time, I look at the 2XL wheels and I think, yeah, I don't think anything bigger would be wise. Like, even if it's technically accurate, I think, 2XL is like the best, biggest wheel to really go up to. Unless you're building to a particular scale, which a couple of people have done. But yeah, I think if this went any bigger, it will probably kind of ruin some of the proportions.
Yeah, I haven't found a use for yeah, I haven't found a use for anything bigger than 2XL. Kind of use Gordon as like my standard, as like, all right, how do I scale things? I can't find it. The only thing that would be bigger than this would be a Sterling single.
Yes, of course.
And that's the only thing I can think of that would ever require a bigger wheel than that.
I've made a version of Emily, and that uses a 2XL, and in a weird way, even with the way that I've built it and the wheel arch for the driver as well, it definitely doesn't feel right. So I think, yeah, I'm in agreement with you where that Sterling single locomotive will be the only model I can think of that would deserve a 3XL driver.
Anything else is just, they're totally in the realm of fantasy if you want to build with 3XL, or it's just you're building at a different scale entirely, like what the Hogwarts Express is itself.
So do you have a most favorite and least favorites model that you've made?
I think right now, Gordon is probably my favorite model. For, I mean, obvious reasons. He's
Yeah, of
kind of
course.
like, despite being one of the first ones I finished,
There's just one model you put that little
he
bit
feels
more
like
effort
my
into.
king. You know what I mean? Like how your streamlined coronation is like your headliner.
Yeah.
Gordon's definitely my headliner. As for least favorite, I think it would be my James model. I really don't even know why. I just think maybe it's the red. Not really sure, but I think James is probably my least favorite.
You might be onto something with the red because I've made lots of models, with red. Thinking back to before I did anything with lining tape, the red is just really garish, and depending on what other colors you have to kind of complement the red, it really can be a bit of a frustrating thing to kind of get right. The model could be perfectly sound, but the fact that it's red and it doesn't have any other colors to kind of, again, kind of accent the red, so okay, that might not be the right word, but yeah, there was definitely times where if I were to make the streamline coronation now, but didn't put any lining tape on it, I would think, that doesn't look good. So looking at the pictures you just sent here, I think this definitely looks like an excellent model, and the use of two different colors for the lining as well is definitely a good thing because it just, again, I think that's what it is for me at least. Just red is just so garish, it's so vibrant.
I definitely like red as like an accent color. I mean, look at my Gordon. I've got the red rods. I absolutely love the red rods.
Hmm.
The entire model, I don't know, something about red just sucks itself. I don't know. It's like a void.
Yeah, red should be the backup color, not the main color.
Uh, but really do anything that I can't do anything about that if I'm modeling James.
Yeah. So are there any models that you haven't built yet that you would love to build? So I suppose this goes to your work in progress list of models that you haven't. Oh, that reminds me, I forgot to mention this earlier because of the coach. So the coach is definitely one thing, but because of your build style, your model of Diesel 10 and Lady is something I am begging to see.
At the moment, Diesel 10 is more of a collection of parts, really, than anything to look at. There's really not much of a point in seeing that one at the moment. However, Lady is basically, I mean, in terms of presenting her online, I could basically call the model done. But there's still some interior work to finish, things inside that need work, and some technical things to make sure that the model is sound and and make sure that the model is truly sound. Lady, like the rest of my models, because I am a weird stickler for whatever version of accuracy I've decided to come up with, based her on a live steam model, like the miniature stuff that people build in, garden railways and stuff.
Oh yeah,
She's LSBC, LCBS? I don't remember the acronym.
LBSCR.
She's a Titch. It's one of those, like, 3-inch gauge live steam models that everyone
Ah,
has.
yes. Yeah, I remember seeing some of those that particular garden scale locomotive, like a freelance design.
Yeah, I mean, I basically found like the most generic one I could because I mean, Titch is very freelance to begin with. I've seen 100 different, tenders, different funnels, different side tanks. I mean, it's kind of a do what you want type of model. So it was kind of perfect for Lady. It was the perfect proportions what she looked like in the Magic Railroad. The nature of the Titch also gave me freedom to like give her the sloped front running board and make it look more like Lady while still being accurate to a Titch.
Speaking of the running board, that's a very interesting choice to use a shade of blue instead of the conventional black or like red on the outside, for example.
I think that has to do with Lady accuracy towards Lady herself. I don't know exactly what colors. I actually think her running board might be like a dark purple, dark blue. I'm not entirely sure. This was the best Yeah, it's like a dark maroon purple. Program didn't really have the right colors, and also the contrasting colors, like the shades being that much different from one another. It
Yeah,
felt nice.
that's one thing that's
This is
quite
one of those.
frustrating with Lego, where I wanted to, well, for example, for me at least, I wanted to make the green Thomas from The Adventure Begins, but I couldn't like find a closer shade of green outside of the normal green. So, and something I've complained about for the longest time, trying to make a particular light blue locomotive. There's like 5 different shades of light blue, so I ultimately got too intimidated and gave up because I wasn't certain on which shade I should really use. So yeah, I can definitely understand that sort of bit where it's like that struggle to try and get the right color.
Yeah, and Lady is also one of those models that I kind of built. She's more of a modification of another model I did. I have actually have three Thomases. I have proper E2, full sized
Yeah, yeah.
E2 tank engine. Then I made a miniature, something that's more accurate to the actual Railway Series art and the TV series. It's a much, actually, short, stumpy Thomas. Then I built a freelance design based off Audrey's original wooden toy that he made for Christopher.
Oh yeah, I remember seeing that actually. That turned into an 042 or something like that.
Yeah, and it's an 042, the Audrey Thomas.
Mm. That was a very cool.
Um,
That was a very cool design. I remember seeing a
yeah,
couple of iterations in one of the servers, and I remember, well, not to say I had the idea, but I remember being interested in doing a model of Thomas in that shape. But then you showed up with your models. I thought, oh my god, this is just beautiful. It was general. I think it's because you uploaded variants. Like, I don't think it wasn't just color variants. It was like, okay, cylinders here. We got this color. We got this design. This particular thing as well.
yeah,
So
I
that
went
made
through
it
a couple
so
different
good.
versions of the wheelbase. I wasn't sure what I wanted the wheel arrangement to be. I was just kind of throwing different things at the Discord to see what other people's opinions on them were. I actually forgot about this model until brought up the Thomases. I've got quite. These are ones that I have that I forgot to mention are finished.
Now
Lady
that is a
and
very busy model, but that complements it so much.
yeah, I was just trying to. Wasn't basing this particular model off of anything. All I had was an image of, you know, Audrey's wooden toy, and also the knowledge that it's apparently some sort of J50. That I use the J50 all that much as reference here, except for in the very front with the sloped tanks.
Yeah,
I just kind of had to do whatever I needed to do to make it look realistic, for lack of a better word. Giving
yeah,
it those
definitely.
details that go, okay, this is how this tank engine would look. Yeah, the wooden Thomas and Lady, both modifications of the Railway Series Thomas, the more EV book accurate one. And then here for, because I haven't shown Thomas yet, comparison to the wooden, or not the wooden, the Railway Series model I just showed you, it is my E2 Thomas.
Ah, yes, the other one that you entered into the awards. I think this, like your model of Gordon, it definitely what's the word to use? It definitely benefits from having that double lining on the sides. Just a single lining detail is that's standard, but you thought let me just test this double lining, and it just adds that little extra something, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, that was something. Cause when I went to go to line up the models, I was experimenting with a couple of things, and I'm like, felt because obviously I go for a much more realistic take. I was doing the regular lining, and I'm like, just didn't feel realistic enough. I was like, well, how would this really look like in person? As you know, if you were really standing next to the real Thomas the Tank Engine, or a proper E2 even. Just one thick line. I don't think there's any locomotives that have just one thick line. I tried a couple different things, and the double thin lining was it struck the chord. It was the winner. Gordon and James both have the same. Seems to be my default for all of my primary models for realistic takes on the characters. Even done it for Percy.
Yeah, I think having seen this not too long ago, because I think having looked at your models, I've kind of gotten used to the whole double lining method. I've looked at some of my other engines and I thought, I wonder if I could try double lining on any of them. But I think I should probably back off from that idea in case I run out of lining tape too quickly. But yes, as a technique, as a kind of stylistic choice, it works again so well.
It just kind of became the default after I decided, oh, single lining wasn't enough. On the Railway series Thomas, he looks fine there. He looks fine there, because it's what Thomas looks like in that shape.
Yeah.
Going with the more realistic take, even comparing it to the Audrey Wooden Thomas, double lining just gives it that little bit more character.
Definitely so. If you were going to build a Lego train railway layout, um, kind of space available aside, how would you like? What would your ideal layouts be? Would it be more passenger focused? Would you have a goods yard? What segments would you make? How would you build your layout basically?
If I had to, or if I was going to do it properly, it would probably be like a big, similar to yours, one big, loop. I think I would have each section, or section it off again, similarly to how you do with each part. I would make, landmarks from Sodor. So, like, my goods yard might be connected to Tidmouth Station, or Tidmouth Sheds. And then further down the line, I'd have Knapford. And I just kind of pick out iconic scenes in the stories and kind of just apply them to a big loop. I've never really put a whole lot of thought into a layout because doubt I'm ever going to have the space or the money to actually have. I can barely do my locomotives and the stock themselves as it is. Hopefully in the future, but I couldn't tell you when that would be happening.
There are some people. I think Techno Andrew is one of the people who doesn't have a layout. He doesn't have any kind of dioramas or anything like that. He would just set up a loop of track, and that's basically it. I'm falling more into that camp as well because of my space restrictions. I can get two running lines in my room. There's no decoration. There's nothing fancy to make it look like a layout. It's literally just two loops of track. And
Yeah.
honestly, that's all most people really need. You only really go for a layout if you want to go all in when it comes to building railway stuff in Lego. So, not having a layout for the longest time really isn't a problem as such. But yeah, it's again, like I said a moment ago, it's like more of a hardcore thing. But the just having track is what most people just really need.
Oh yeah. Especially with the size of my, I mean, like this with the size of some of my locomotives, I definitely need to invest in wider radius stuff.
Yeah,
Isn't
wide radius curves is like a default investment because it's a lifesaver. It really is.
I mean, I try my absolute hardest to make sure that my models work on R40 because simply because that's what I have access to. So far, I've succeeded. And would they just work nicer on the larger radius stuff?
I do exactly that as well. I have it in my mind where I think, okay, let's say I take my models to a friend's house, or like a clubmate's house, and he's got some train tracks. Like, okay, cool, but he's not going to have anything wider radius than the standard, or at least what's standard available, the whole R40 things. So if I want to have a bit of fun, I don't want to bring a model that goes, oh, I can't run it on your track because it's purposefully built for something wider. So I always test my models and build them so they can go over R40 switches. If it can do that, it can do any track.
Yeah, exactly.
Do you have a favorite or a standout Lego train builder that you are following online?
Ooh, there's a couple. I think I'd have to say Trace Pierce. He seems to have uh, closest to what I myself have a very similar aesthetic in general. When it comes to what he builds versus how he builds it, and I've gotten quite a bit of inspiration from him for certain things. I know that my open plank wagon had actually tried to reverse engineer his before it ended up being what mine is.
All right.
In construction at where it is, it's a totally different model. Visually, it has some of the same cues because of how I started it, which was an attempt at recreating traces. There's plenty of other people. You mentioned British Bricks earlier. I've definitely used some of his videos for inspiration before. You mentioned Liam Biggs, West Turngate.
That's a name I haven't heard in a long time. Again, he's built so many different versions of his layout. There's kind of an in joke with Trace's layout, but it's never too big, so to say. If I was going to build my layout and put it next to his, I would much rather have his layouts because it's so much more self-controlled.
Yeah, his. I mean, I've only seen videos, obviously, but I absolutely love the aesthetic of his layout.
Having mentioned Trace as well, I also remember discovering Trace for the first time online. It was probably a couple of months before I joined the LUKR. This was back when he was building 6 wide models. Even because there's a lot of people that still ask me about. Well, not that many people. There are still people that come up to me and say, any tips for building this? How would you go about doing this thing? And whenever they say about width and scale, I would say to them, just jump into the deep end, go 8 wide, because 6 wide is definitely the starter width, but the wider you go, the more you will realize you've got more space to make more detailed models. But with
Oh
Trace,
yeah,
with his
absolutely.
6 wide, like, you would only know his 6 wide models were 6 wide if you looked at the locomotive at certain angles.
I tend to stick with the 7 and 8 wide, depending on the model. 6 is tough. It's only because I should say 7 is more difficult. I don't have a lot of space with 6.
Yeah, I've
The narrow.
definitely in my mind I've definitely sort of categorized 6, 7, and 8, where 6 is like the entry level because you don't have to worry too much about proportions and whatnot. 7 is where you want to try and go up and go up just by one stud. You definitely got more space to get more details in. I even remember when I built my first 7 wide model in January 2020, the difference of just going one stud wider was kind of insane. But I also had that same revelation when I went from 7 to 8. I thought, oh my god, this is way better.
Oh yeah, I mean, it was kind of the same way. I mean, I was definitely the same way. I started off 6, and then it looked weird, and then I went to 7, and then it looked weird for certain models, and then I just went through it. Size is a different size of scale. Gordon's 8 wide, Thomas and most of my smaller guys are 7 wide. And then I do my narrow gauge stuff at 6. I actually don't think you've seen any of my narrow gauge stuff, have you, Luke?
I don't. I may have seen a model of Scarlowy, but I'm probably misremembering. But amazingly, I've got that rule as well now. Where okay, so narrow gauge stuff is now basically 6 wide. Tank engines can be 7 wide, and the big models can be 8 wide. It just
Yeah,
it fits that way. That reminds
narrow
me
gauge.
because I have had this tab saved for the longest time where there is was it you I was talking to about this? About the small size wheel with a small pin on it for drive rods.
Yeah. I was the one you were talking about with that.
I really need to give that a try one day because, well, I'm waiting for money to kind of build up again before I go in for this. But I definitely think at a 6 wide, well, just for narrow gauge models in general, if you want to do something with a drive wheel, this definitely seems appropriate for it.
What store that was that bought them, or that sold the Bricks on Rails? It's Bricks on Rails that has those regular sized wheels with the pins built in for the real small drivers.
Because I remember a time where I built my model of Scarloey to 6 wide. Putting a minifigure in the cab seemed like the minifigure was basically too small. But at the time as well, my model of Percy was also 6 wide, and basically Scarloey and Percy were the same size, which was very wrong. But that also was because I also wanted my Scarloey to have drive motion still, and it uses medium-sized drivers, which is the same as what my Percy uses, and that also presented more scale inconsistencies.
Digitally, I know that Scarloey's drivers at the moment don't work. I also intend on getting the Bricks on Rails small drivers, so I will eventually.
So not to derail the question too much, that's kind of my fault there. But outside, so besides Trace, was there anyone else that you are keeping a keen eye on?
There's Seth Bricht. Seth, can't remember
Yeah,
what
just
username
Seth
online is.
Bricks. Yeah,
I believe he's a T-fold, but he's quite good digitally as well.
he's one of the TFOs that surprises me in the sense that whenever you like with the Brick Train Awards as well, it's a great example of showcasing this. When you
Actually, didn't
see,
he win one of the categories?
I don't think I can't remember if Seth did. Maybe he was a
I think he
runner-up.
won
I'm
something. I can't
misremembering.
remember what it is though.
I'll have to look it up afterwards. But T Seth is one of the amazing examples where you look at a model submitted by a TFOL, and this happened at the start of the year with the LUKR awards, and we had some of the TFOL models come in. I looked at them and I thought, there's no way a TFOL made this. But it's amazing how much talent can be shown at such a young age. Like Seth really has a future, so to say, if he continues building Lego trains and goes along the railway path with brick building.
Aside from those names, which I'm surprised I even remembered that many. I'm terrible with remembering names and stuff. I really can't think of very many others.
There are a lot of people that have been popping up more so, but I think because you know certain people for longer, like yourself and Seth and Trace, you're more familiar with their build style because you followed them more. But I think as more people come into the Lego train hobby, they'll definitely have something to not to make them stand out, so to say, but they'll definitely have that one model where you look at them and go, yeah, that's made by that guy. So for
I
the
definitely agree. There's a couple that always pop up in my feed sometimes. I'm like, oh, I don't even have to look at the username. I know who did that.
So, and finally, do you have any upcoming projects that you wish to share here and now?
Well, I have a constant flow of work in progresses, but I don't mind showing off you that I've teased at before. I think on my Twitter, but I've not really fully gone. Hey, here it is. That would be Donald and Douglas, the Caledonian 812s.
There was a thing as well. I remember. I think it was Unlucky Tug. Just to briefly derail again, where he did one of his Thomas debunks, where it was basically a well actually.
Yeah, I remember
Yeah,
that. They're
they're
not.
not 8-1. They're not 812s. They're 652s, I think. But they're basically the same
Yeah.
thing.
Hardly agree with his assessment, by the way. I can't really. It's hard to differentiate reference images of the two of them. Oh, I'm stuck with the 812.
The thing with the 812 with me personally, when I was making, I only had Douglas built for the longest time, and in my mind I thought this feels wrong in a way, where technically it's built to scale. This is how it's supposed to be, but when it's put next to other engines, it's tiny. I don't know if that was just my build style or if that was how the engine kind of actually is represented. But it was, I don't know, it was something that kind of bugged me.
Possibly, because I mean, let me compare mine real fast, actually, too. My Caledonian is it's with the tender. The engine, the boiler is smaller than James's boiler, but the tender is longer than James's boiler. So they end up being like the exact same length and size in general.
Yeah, that was definitely
To
one of the things as well. Again, when you have, I think it was only because I was looking at that model on its own, being able to kind of hold the boiler kind of on its own in my hand quite comfortably. It's like, oh, it does feel tiny, but yeah, it was like you just said. You put it next to another model, it is really that long. It really is that big.
it's definitely deceiving because it feels small, even in pairing it. It's not. Aside from Donald and Douglas, the 812, also working on. Now this one's going to be a long way out for a while, but Kidmouth Sheds looks the image. It looks more complete than it is. It definitely looks more complete than it is because I basically one unit copied over and over again. More for a scale thing. It's going to be a behemoth.
No doubt, yeah. Like sheds are just. This is kind of why the shed that I made for my layout is quite minuscule because by default it's a massive thing to have to build. So yeah, just looking at
Yeah.
this, I wish you good luck because by the time it's finished, it will look like something incredible. But there's no doubt this is going to take you forever to do.
Well, yeah. I mean, I wouldn't even like I said. Right now, it's way less complete than it looks. The turntable is scratch. Which, by the way, it uses a regular R40 rails for the entire thing, so you can get a scale for just how big the turntable will be by itself. One of the ways I work best, because I'm terrible with buildings, is give me something to modify rather than start from scratch. So this, the the berths on this are actually instructions I found for free online, and then I recolored what I wanted. Roof needs to change. The doors need to change. Basically, everything about it needs to change. This is just stand-in to get a sense of size for myself. I don't have space for a layout. Kind of intend this to be like a primary display. I want to have sheds with engines. It's like my end goal in terms of going physical. If I ever manage to do more, great. I want Famous 8 and Tidbith.
Well, just the sheds or like the station as well.
Um, Shed. I mean, the names of the sheds change depending on its TBS, or the TV series,
All
or
right, yeah.
the Railway series. I can never grew up with the TV series, and it's been such a long time since I read the actual Railway series, so I get them backwards all the time. I think I default to the TV series because that's more fresh.
Yeah,
But
I do. Yeah, I default to the TV series mainly because I'm too young for the books. So, like, I grew up
like,
watching. I grew up watching the model series. So for me, that's my
oh
default.
yeah, same here. Like clearly, sheds I'm building are based on the TV series. The ones in the Railway series, it's just a big room. It's just a single big square box of a room that has the turntable inside of it. There's no berths per se. It's just
Yeah,
big square where it's all inside. Not really all that fun to build or visually appealing.
it would definitely be easier to build because it's just big empty room. Definitely would
Yeah,
save you a bit of
totally.
money on
But
the bricks.
then it's like, well, looking at it, you can't see any of the engines, so what's the point?
Yeah, exactly.
I want this to be like a framing thing for all of my, well, at the moment I believe it's 7 berths.
Yeah, there's 7 there.
I think there's a line that goes up the side or something, but it'll house, the display unit. It'll be like the framing feature for my models.
So that was all of the questions that I had for you. Are there any closing comments you wish to say to the audience?
Um, well, thanks for having me. And I hope you guys liked what I had to show. I'm relatively new to the community, so don't go too hard on me.
Do you have any
You know what I'm
social media
saying?
pages that you want to plug as well? Of course, now's a grand time to kind of sell yourself.
Yeah, right. Well, I mostly post on Twitter, but I have an Instagram and Flickr, and they're under the same name, the Lego Railway Series.
Okie doke. So that is the end of this first episode of the Brick Railway Builders podcast. Thank you all ever so much for watching. All of the links to the social media pages for my guest are in the description. And now to try a tagline for this podcast, we'll BRB with some more BRBs. Thank you very much for tuning in, everyone. I shall see you very soon. Take care, everyone. Goodbye.
See you guys online.